If you like listening to podcasts as much as we do, you may want to listen to us while you're working out or going for a run or doing a number of other things. Maybe you're grocery shopping or maybe you listen to us while you're supposed to be working. Whatever it is, if you want to add a beat in the background for some extra motivation, you should check out this new app called Podbeat.
Podbeat is a free mobile app that lets you add any beat style to any podcast for your workout. It's easy to use and free to download in the App Store. Sometimes podcasts may lose your attention because you're just listening to someone talk. With Podbeat, podcasts are a lot more fun.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And the other thing that I really like about Podbeat is that you can choose from a bunch of different beats. So it's not like you're listening to the same thing over and over. There are a ton of options. Some that I prefer myself. I really like the funk beat, which you can hear in the background right now. And another one that's one of my favorites is the trap beat.
I agree. I love the trap beat as well. I also really like that for each beat I pick, I can change the treble, the BPM, the volume, and the bass levels. I'm like my own DJ. It's a lot of fun. Definitely check out Podbeat in the App Store or also on Google Play Store for Android users. Okay, on to the show.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Rewind Rewatch podcast.
Welcome.
My name is Joel.
And I am Andrene.
And we are siblings that will be re-watching and reviewing 90s movies. We have reviewed a bunch of different movies, some that we've selected, some that listeners have requested,
Yes.
And so we are actually going to be doing another listener request today.
Listener request.
And this is one that I'm very happy to be able to rewatch and review today because this is also one of my favorite movies. So I was glad to see the review came in, and this is Boyz N the Hood.
Yes.
John Singleton, 1991 film. John Singleton's first film. He was 24 years old when he made this, believe it or not.
Crazy.
And it stars Ice Cube. It stars Cuba Gooding Jr.
Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne, Angela Bassett, Nia Long, and Morris Chestnut. What
Thoughts?
even before we start going into this movie, because there's a lot to go into.
Oh gosh, is there?
How well do you remember this movie?
So I remember watching it before, obviously, and really enjoying it. I remember it being really sad.
Yeah.
But it's been like a few years since I've rewatched it. So there definitely were parts that I didn't quite remember all the details. Like I knew the general gist of it. I knew how it was going to end, obviously. But like I didn't really remember a lot of the ins and outs. So this was a pleasant, well, I should say pleasant, but I mean, it was a good movie to rewatch. I'll say that. Do you want me to give my summary, the one sentence summary, or do you want to do that yourself?
I mean, you volunteered, so go ahead. Feel free.
Okay, so how would I describe Boyz N the Hood in one sentence?
One sentence.
Okay, let's say, okay, this is a coming of age story following 3 young black males growing up in South Central LA.
Okay, yeah.
Like
that's a summary, yeah.
without giving
That works.
anything away,
That works.
that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, this is a movie that, like I said, it's one of my favorite movies. I've seen it a bunch of times, so it's still a movie that I still feel like I pick up more when I rewatch it. Like, this is a movie that it's a little under 2 hours. I feel like every time I watch the movie, there are parts of it that I don't remember from the last time I watched.
Yeah.
And so that happened again this time. Like, I've probably seen this movie at least 5 times now. But I feel like every time, like, there's something about it that I'm not picking up. It's interesting watching, like, these classic black films from, over 30 years ago and kind of seeing how some of the careers progressed. It's funny because, like, I
Yeah.
was watching the movie with my girlfriend and, there's, like, a random, like, Regina King cameo
Yeah.
where
yeah.
she's in, like, 2 or 3 scenes, and it's like, yo, it's funny because she's probably like the most successful person in this film, and she's like not even a factor in this story.
Well, about that, this is actually her first movie that she did. So she had been in like I think a couple of TV shows, but this is actually her first big screen performance, and she had a very small part, as you said. And watching it, you're like, oh, that's Regina King.
Yeah.
And now she's Regina King. And back then, it was just like some girl at a barbecue who was crushing on Cuba's character.
Yeah.
So that's always nice to see how people have progressed. So,
And yeah, Cuba, like I feel like he kind of hit a peak a little bit after that, like in the 90s and 2000s. I feel like he was in a bunch of stuff, like when he did like Mr. Holland's Opus, he did that radio movie, he was in Pearl Harbor. Like he did like a bunch of like, he was kind of making a splash after this, but man, this was a really good performance by him. I really enjoyed everything about him, his relationship with his dad. Like we'll get into all of it.
He was so earnest, like as a character.
Yeah, like I feel like he really was a great Trey. Ice Cube played a great Doughboy. And yeah, what more can you say about Lawrence Fishburne that hasn't already been said? I mean, the man's amazing, and he lives up to it in this movie as well.
Oh man, this is actually Ice Cube's first role as well. I believe John Singleton wanted Ice Cube to play Doughboy, and he like sought him out because Ice Cube was like, I don't really know, and he was like, no, like we need you for this role, like you have to do this.
Which is amazing because when you think about that timeline, this movie comes out in 1991. Obviously, Ice Cube has just left NWA around this time, and so like when you think about kind of where he was in his career, obviously he didn't start acting yet. He wasn't doing, Are We There Yet, and all those movies that he would go on to do.
That's a great film. I mean, come on, no,
I've actually never seen it.
Me either.
I don't have any plans to watch it, but. This is even before Friday, which is the first movie that I believe he wrote Friday. So this probably is influential in terms of putting the battery in his back to even start pursuing that. 1990 is when he puts out America's Most Wanted, which is his debut album as a solo artist right after he left NWA. And then he put out another album called Death Certificate in 91. So I couldn't imagine because I was only 5 years old, but I can imagine this was also like a really pivotal time for him, like to be able to kind of like do a film like this that was critically acclaimed, got nominated for an Oscar, and he's like fresh out of this group that was big. He's starting to make a name for himself as a solo artist. Like 1991, like Ice Cube is the man. Like this is before Tupac and Biggie really blew up either.
Yeah.
So
and not just that, like to do a movie like this has so many messages behind it. It's not just like this film where we're just shooting people up. It's like there's a lot to be learned from this movie.
And that was the kind of artist he was as well. And I feel like, especially America's Most Wanted is kind of like the film version. It's like the audio version of this movie. Like a lot of the things that they're talking about and showing in Boyz N the Hood is what he was trying to like hit people to. I mean, even in NWA, he was the main one writing all of their lyrics. I feel like NWA is they're legendary because they were kind of like opening America's eyes to what's going on in the hood. And that's such a pivotal part of what this movie actually is like, that famous quote that Doughboy has at the end of the movie, right? Where he's like, they either don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. And I feel like the purpose of this movie, there's a lot of purposes in this movie, but it's kind of showing you all the things, and I feel like that's also who Ice Cube was as an artist.
Okay, so let's jump into the actual movie, shall we?
Yeah.
You ready to jump in?
I mean, yeah. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of different characters, and I feel like, yeah. I mean, we can go through it. Do you want to like go through it like chronologically, or do you want to kind of go through like the different things that happen?
Well, before we do any of that, I want to start with how the movie opens because I thought like that they're hitting you over the head like this movie is not going to be for the faint of heart, So basically, the movie starts, and the opening scene when it comes out, like first of all, it's all black. We can't see anything at all, but we're hearing something going on. Like these guys are yelling and shouting, and essentially, it's a drive-by about to happen, right? We hear the gunshots. We hear the wheels, peeling out. Someone's in a car. They drive off. And then this quote appears across the screen. And the quote basically says, one in every 21 Black American males will be murdered in their lifetime. Most will die at the hands of another Black male. So, like, it starts like that. So you're like, whoa, this is going to be a serious movie. So they're kind of already setting you, like, in that type of mindset. And then we see these kids, they're getting ready to walk to school. They take this slight deviation, like, oh, you guys want to see something? And they walk around to this crime scene. There's crime scene tape. They cross under it. They walk over. And there's, like, blood, essentially. Like
blood and bullet holes on the wall.
Oh, my gosh. Like, on the street. You see, like, newspapers, the blood on them, on the walls. And they're like, oh, wow, what's going on? And it's like, these kids are, like, what, 10 years old on their way to school? Yeah. And they're, like, walking by a crime scene that has not been properly cleaned, like, not even close to it. And later on, they actually see a dead body. Like, they actually come upon a body that's just, like, laying there in the park. And it's like, they're not even going to school yet. Like, they're on their way to school first thing in the morning, and, like, they're seeing blood and, like, dead bodies at the age of 10, let's say. So just think about how that's going to affect you, like, your psyche.
Yeah, I feel like that's a masterstroke by John Singleton because, like I said, the movie is just under 2 hours. But we don't see these fully formed characters in their, teens. I guess they're 17, 18 years old by the end of the movie. Mm-hmm. But we don't meet them at that age until maybe 35, 40 minutes into the film. So the whole first, act of the movie is basically like them as kids showing how they were influenced by their environment. And I feel like that's just like such a pivotal part of the movie. I mean, Boyz N the Hood, right? Yeah. It's like that's my boy, these are my boys, but it's also like they're actually little boys.
And we're actually in the hood. Like, yeah, like we're having bullets going by, like people you can't even sleep at night.
Helicopters flying above the neighborhood.
Speaking of the
time.
Helicopters, like there's a scene where after they're walking to school, you actually see them in school. They're in the classroom, the teacher is giving them a lesson, and the camera pans over the different drawings that the children made. Mm-hmm. And that just stuck in my head because it's like the drawings that they have. The first drawing they show is a body like in a grave in the ground. That's some kid drew. The second picture is of a Black man with his hands raised and a cop car like in front of him. Mm-hmm. And the third one is a helicopter with the letters LAPD on it and like a beam of light like shooting down to the road. They're chasing somebody, and I'm like, these are what the children are drawing during like art class. Like, draw a picture, and it's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to draw a picture of my cousin in the grave. Like, this is just their reality, and this is what they're showing. And it's just another way of, like, being like, yeah, this is how they live, and this is their quote-unquote normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's also, like, such a big part of what this movie is like, who do you become based on who you are intrinsically versus, like, what your environment creates?
Right.
And
the whole nature versus nurture?
It is. It's very much nature versus nurture. I feel like there are some, like, messages in the film that are hitting you over the head, but I feel like there's certain parts of it that I noticed them more watching it this time that I didn't really, like, subconsciously maybe I did, but I didn't really think about it before. So, like, you're basically following this kid named Trey. He lives with his mom. His dad also lives somewhere nearby. We can assume that they're still in LA. They didn't really make that clear. But he's basically like a little bit of a smart ass, making jokes in class.
Who said that? Mr. Styles.
That's me.
How is it you always have something funny to say?
Because I'm a comedian.
But he also knows things. And so the teacher's like, oh, if you're going to keep making jokes during the lesson, you want to come up here and teach? He's like, okay, I can do that. So he goes up and basically starts talking about Africa, how the whole civilization of humanity started in Africa and how that's where everybody's from and how he learned it from his dad. So we know that his dad is present. We know that his dad is dropping gems on him.
Yes.
But he ends up like, flexing with some other kid who's trying to flex on him. posturing 10-year-olds, and this is
Yeah.
obviously like, the environment that they're in where everybody has to defend themselves. So he's getting into fights, and apparently him and his mother had made a agreement that he signed.
First of all, this contract. I just want to pause right here because I chuckled to myself when the mom was reading it because it's like, again, he's 10, and she's making him sign this legally binding contract. Like, I didn't write down the whole thing, but there was a part of it that kind of made me laugh because it was like,
Well, before we talk about the contract is actually about the fact that if he gets in trouble, if he gets into fights, then he basically has to go live with his dad.
right. But it was just funny to me because I felt like the way she was making him, like, he's a 10-year-old child, and it's like, I tray of like sound mind and body, do hereby. It's like, there's like very, very much legalese in this contract, and he's a 10-year-old, but that kind of made me laugh. But
I feel like that's also a part of it, right? It's like they say, like, if you treat your kids, if you talk to your kids like they're grown, then they won't feel like babied. And I feel like there's something to that, right? Like his mom, we learned, is like working on getting a master's. His dad owns his own business. His dad reads all the time. We see him reading in the film.
yes.
So it's like he kind of has these influences where it's like they're not treating him the same way that his friends' parents are treating them.
That's very apparent. And so actually, there's actually a part where after basically his teacher calls the mom to basically say like he's suspended from school till like next Tuesday for fighting, and the mom gets pissed off, and the teacher's like, the mom says to the teacher, "All right, well, since he's gonna act up, I'm gonna go send him to live with his father." And she's like, "His father?" And she's like, "Yes, he has a father. Or do you think we make babies all by ourselves?" And like slams the phone down. And it was kind of funny to me because it's like the way the teacher said it was almost like she couldn't believe that his father was present.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, why? Because he's black. And a lot of the kids out here didn't have their fathers present. And it's very apparent when you're looking.
And also, she probably never spoke to his father. So that's like,
true. That's true.
You're the only parent that I know.
She
so
said father. But
who is this man?
but then it's like you think about it, like, his best friend, Ricky, and his brother, I think it's Darren. Later on, we call him Doughboy, but his name is Darren. His dad's not around. He raised by their mom, and so that's pretty much all he knows. But he has two parents who are very present, who are very learned, and they want to make sure that he is. Although they can't financially take him out of that type of environment, it's like, although you have to live here, we're gonna make sure that you can overcome this. You can actually, maybe become better than we are and get out of here. So they're trying to help him navigate the world that he lives in. And so his parents were definitely like a big part of why his character turned out to be the way that he did, which we'll kind of talk about more later.
So yeah, I mean, I think it brings this whole concept of like being a product in your environment, right? Like I think about conversations that I've had about this topic of like, are you someone who sees the world around you and then like becomes the trauma that you've endured versus the people who see trauma and they're like, I'm going to fight my hardest to make sure that I don't fall into that. And I don't know where those differences are drawn from. Like, I don't know if that has to do with personality types or if that has to do with what, but like, it's interesting because it does feel like the way that this film is set up specifically is that like Trey, you can imagine, would have become a product of his environment if not for his parents like constantly like stepping in and reinstilling him with like a different way of thinking.
I mean, because from the very moment he goes to his dad's house, furious, basically figures gives him all these chores to do. He's like, all right, so now you're going to have to make sure you're mowing the lawn. You got to clean the bathroom. You got to make your bed. And he's like, I got to do all that. And it's like, yeah, like you're living with me now. Like I pay the bills. I make sure you have food and clothing, but the rest of it's kind of up to you. And so again, his friends,
he said like, I'm trying to teach you responsibility and so that you're not running around like your friends
are
who don't have anybody checking for them. And he says to him like, this is gonna pay off. Just see how they end up.
Yeah,
that's what he says to him. Like, yo, see how they end up.
And his dad knew exactly what was coming. He's been there before. He knows how this works.
So, can we talk about this contract again? Because I think it's the part that throws me off. Not the contract itself, but like, why was this agreement in place? Because
He's been fighting.
no, yes, but by all accounts, and based on everything that we see for the rest of the film, the dad lives in a much worse neighborhood. So why would he get in trouble and then they send him to like a worse neighborhood than where he was in the first
He'll
place?
listen to the dad. Because I feel like you got to think about like, I mean, I don't know because I don't have children, but I can imagine raising a male, not just a male, but a black male in that kind of environment. That's why a lot of these moms, like, they don't know what to do. It's like, I can't handle, and at this age, he's only 10 years old, and he's still getting into fights in school. He's still running wild. What's going to happen when he gets taller than her?
Yeah.
And he, like, bucks up? Like, what's she going to do? But you got a black man in the house. Like, who's going to check Furious? He's not going to check him.
No, that's real. That's a good
like,
point.
He's not going to check him. So it's like, all right, you got to go to your pop's house.
It just felt like he was like,
I get what you're saying.
being crossed over to a worse neighborhood where like there was probably more bad influences than would have existed if he just stayed where his mom lived.
Well, he was still friends with them, living at his mom's house.
Well, that's because he used to go to his dad's house on weekends. Because,
that's right.
When he moved in, and then he was like, "We're gonna have to treat this the same way we do on the weekends. Like, you're not off the hook. Like, just because you live here now, like, you still got to do all the same chores that you was doing on Saturdays and Sundays."
But yeah, I think mom just kind of at her wits' end, and she's
I
have to do what I have to make sure my son. Remember, she even says to him, she's like, "I want to make sure that you don't end up like shot, in jail, or drunk outside of a liquor store."
Mm-hmm.
And I see that's where you're going now. So she's like, I got to nip it in the bud as soon as possible. So I get why she did it.
So we talk about his two friends who grow up to but they grow up to be played by Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut.
They didn't become them?
They didn't. So Ice Cube plays Doughboy, and Morris Chestnut plays Ricky. And they're brothers, but they have different fathers. Neither father is present. They're both being raised by their mom. The mom has a very clear favorite child.
Oh, yeah.
The first time we meet Doughboy as children, they're in the house. Well, the first time we meet the mom, anyway, she's basically sitting on the couch, cussing him out, telling him he ain't shit, telling him he's basically like...
He's fat.
He's fat, he's stupid, he's not going to be nothing. And he basically is getting like negative reinforcement from the time that he's a child. And meanwhile, Ricky doesn't talk to him that way. And then like when the friends are talking at one point, I think it was Lil Chris who says like, "Oh yeah, his mom basically doesn't like him because she doesn't like his dad." So like basically that relationship ended poorly.
Crazy.
And whatever beef she had with the dad, she kind of like carries it now out on the son.
That's terrible.
Where she's like, "Yo, you just like your daddy," is what she says to him. So it's like he's now getting like all of these negative reinforcements. His brother's getting positive reinforcements, which is also making him feel worse because it's like, oh, you can be a loving mother. You just don't do it for me, but I see you do it for him. So then that's basically like the whole thing is like they're growing up together, but then we see that like Doughboy already kind of has a penchant for getting in a little bit of trouble. We see him get like arrested by police when
like
he's a child.
Yeah, for stealing.
And that's basically set 7 years in the past. When we cut to present day, Doughboy is like getting out of jail. So we can assume that throughout his childhood, he was basically like in and out of the court system, in and out of juvenile detention, in and out of jail, and like never really figured it out. Meanwhile, his brother is like a star running back who's trying to get like a scholarship.
He got a baby now.
Out. And he has a baby, right.
With his girl. But yeah, I mean, looking at that whole situation with Doughboy, it just like made me feel so sad for him because it's like he really didn't have a choice.
Doughboy's whole character is like super heartbreaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like he did not have a choice. Like he from the very beginning, like his mom kept telling him he's trash. And then it's like, you know, I'm not that intelligent. What am I supposed to do? I got to make money. And it's like, if you're going home to someone who can't stand you, like, but, you know, the streets are showing me love. What am I supposed to do?
And I think it's also like, what am I even seeing around me, right? Like, Trey, based on what we've seen, is really the only character that seems to have any sort of relationship with his
Pops.
father.
Yeah.
We don't really see a lot of fathers in this film outside of Trey's dad. And he's also kind of like the kid that was able to kind of like live with his mom, live with his dad. His dad is kind of like a, you know, at one point Ricky's like, "Yo, is your dad used to be a preacher?" Like he's
he
like
called him Malcolm Farrakhan.
now, yeah, he's basically like he's giving them all these like
life lessons.
Life lessons. He's giving speeches, and like he's trying to be that adult figure for not only his son but like the people around him.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like he exists on on the fence between these two worlds. Like this Trey character is basically like, I have my friends who are living one life. I have my parents who are like trying to keep me on a straight and narrow. I have this girl that I like. She seems to kind of have her stuff together, but she also still lives in this neighborhood. And he's trying to figure out like kind of like who he is and where he fits in.
Yeah.
And so like when you talk about Cuba Gooding playing that earnestness, I feel like the way he does it is so authentic and sincere because he very much feels like a kid who's trying to like figure his life out.
Yeah, absolutely. And like when you talk about Furious and his life lessons, I think about when they're like 17 or 18 and he talks to them about the whole idea of gentrification.
To bring the property value down. They can buy the land at a lower price. Then they move all the people out, raise the property value, and sell it at a profit. Now what we need to do is we need to keep everything in our neighborhood, everything, black.
Like that scene.
Nah, he's literally like
giving
preaching a sermon on the mount. Like he's standing on a hill talking to his son, and everybody's seeing what's happening.
They start
and
gathering.
They're like, wait a second, what's
he talking about?
It sounds like he's saying something over there.
I mean, he's going in about like how it's gonna be like displacing people who've been there forever, and he's like, watch what happens to the neighborhood. They're gonna start basically pricing us out. And again, I feel like I don't remember that part at all in the movie. I saw it like a few years ago, and I don't remember him talking about gentrification. And I was like, bro, like this is something that obviously is still happening, and will continue to happen.
I mean,
living in the DC area,
it ramped up. He was way ahead of it with that because it ramped up so much more than it had in the 90s. But yeah, like that's a scene that I definitely remember because it's one that stood out when he like goes and shows them the billboard of like, yo, do you understand what's happening? Like they're giving you money for your home so you can get out of here. Like that's literally what this is. And you know, it's no surprise that John Singleton would go on to be one of the creators of Snowfall, which is also kind of
like, you jumped ahead of me. I was so going to bring up Snowfall.
Oh yeah, because I feel like it's
like,
a lot of the same themes.
Right there.
It's the same neighborhood, and it's like around the same timeline. Snowfall's more in the 80s. This movie's more in the 90s. Well, it's 91, so it's like
Snowfall's mid.
It's still crack era.
It's like mid 80s to early 90s is Snowfall. But like, talking about crack, it's the idea of like there's a scene where you see Trey as a teenager and he's like heading back home, and all of a sudden you see him run into the street and there's a baby like just chilling in the middle of the street, and there's a car in front of it. The car had stopped. The baby was not like in immediate danger because the car saw the baby. But like he runs up, and you can tell by the way he's grabbing the child that like he's done this before. He goes over. He's like, wait a second. He grabs the baby. He's like, all right. And you see him like run to this house, knock on the door, and a woman answers the door, and you could tell like she is on drugs. She's a hot mess. And she's like, huh? Hey, you got any money? And he's like, yo, your baby was just out in the middle of the street. She's like, got any rock? Got any blow? I'll suck your D. Like, it was like, bruh. Like, whatever she can do to get that money for that rock. And again, that's how I started thinking about Snowfall, is the idea of how the crack cocaine epidemic, the damage it did to the black community, it's just devastating. And to think that it was the U.S. government bringing the drugs in, giving it to the poor, underserved areas, and then locking people up like, oh, you're on drugs. And it's like, bruh, but you put us on the drugs. Like, you brought the drugs to us, had us take it, and then now you're locking us up for it.
Also, like, addiction shouldn't be a crime. So that's the other piece, right? Like, addiction, we don't treat people who are addicted to opioids as criminals.
We know why that is.
Exactly. So, I feel like this is, the Furious Styles character is like, yes, he's meant to show, like what does it look like when like that one kid has his parents that are giving him good advice versus everybody else who doesn't. But I also feel like from a storytelling standpoint, his character is also meant to like be the messenger of like all the different things that John Singleton's trying to get off his chest.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, oh, I'm seeing all these things happen in the hood, and I feel like there's a better way to do things. And so like he's kind of using Trey's dad as a character, but mostly like as a mouthpiece for like all the messages that he wants to get across. So if you think about the way that he talks to his son about like using protection before he has sex.
Yeah.
He talks to his son about gentrification. He talks to his son about like
gun violence.
He talks to him about police brutality. We see that whole scene where
please talk about these
where the cops don't show up till an hour after the burglary. So it's like throughout the film, it's like, oh, like this is a thing that I want to talk about. And so it's like I'm using this furious character to basically be like all the things that make me furious.
Absolutely.
Like it's basically like
yeah.
Furious Styles is my anger about having
Everything.
to grow up in a neighborhood like this because he's from like the hood in LA.
Exactly.
So it's like, oh, like this is how I grew up and this is the things that made me furious.
Right.
So like these are all the things that I'm gonna have him talk about throughout the course of this film, but like show the right way to handle it.
That's why I liked your idea of the parallel between like this movie and like hip hop. Because that's essentially what it was, right? It's like, this is how I grew up, this is what I saw, and like I'm putting it, you know, all this like behind a beat. Whereas in this sense, she's using a movie to do it. And to go back to the cops, like it's one of those things that really infuriates me because on the one hand, everybody knows you have, you know, what they call them, the bad apples, those cops who, you know, are racist for whatever reason, and they automatically see a black person and think that they're up to no good. But I think what really gets under my skin more are like the black cops that do this. Because it's like, bruh, you're black. Like, you may not think you are. You may think because you're wearing this badge, you're something better. But like, you're black. And like that whole black cop who, when the burglary happens, he shows up and he's kind of just like, oh, you know, too bad you didn't shoot him dead. Would have been one less nigga on the street to worry about. And it's like, bro, what? And then later on, when Trey becomes a teenager and he gets pulled over in his car, that same cop pulls him out, like puts a gun to his throat and like threatens to shoot him. Like, I could blow your head off right here. You couldn't do anything about it. And it's like, bro, what is your problem? Like, and again, he automatically assumes you must be in a gang. You're probably carrying something. Maybe you're a dope boy. You're slinging drugs. And it's like, this is a kid who was completely clean. Like, he had nothing to do with any of that lifestyle.
They put over the wrong car.
Yeah.
And then got the call like, oh, we found the car on this block. He's like, all right, well, y'all get home safe.
Yeah, that was
like,
it.
No apology, no nothing.
He's not gonna apologize.
It's funny that you mentioned that because like every time I think of this Styles P lyric where he said like, "What up, black cop? Every brother ain't my brother."
But I'm black and people in jail is most my color. What a black cop? Every brother ain't no brother.
And I always think about that line when I think
Preach.
about like these police officers where it's like, I think for them, and not just police officers, right? Like this is like the Blacks for Trump and like all these like, I feel like for them it's this sense of like, I didn't end up like that. I don't view the world the same way that you do. And actually, you're making me look bad. So it actually makes them, in some ways, like more racist than white people. Because it's almost like, I don't understand, like, you're giving me a bad name because you can't get your act together. So for them, it's like, I don't see the connection between how the world treats us both unfairly. For me, it's like, basically it's bootstrap theory, right? Like, I was able to figure it out. I got a good job. I was able to go through police academy, and I got my badge, and I'm getting my check every 2 weeks. And you out here selling drugs. And guess what? Like, everybody's gonna be looking at us like black people this is all we do is sell drugs and so it's like they almost like, instead of internalizing all the reasons why that happens, right? It's like you're looking at the effect instead of the cause.
Exactly. That's the problem.
So you just look at the effect and then you're like, what's wrong with these people? Why can't they get it together like I did?
And it's like, were you raised there? Like, did you experience the same thing that they did?
Even if you did. Even if you were raised there, right? Like, I feel like that is one of the biggest problems, and not to get like too much into the political bag, but like,
soapbox.
nah, yeah, like I feel like that's one of the big problems with like the way that we, like our political divide as a country is so much rooted in this idea of like people are unwilling to understand and like empathize. It's like everybody, not everybody, I shouldn't say this, but certain people in this country, I feel like only view things from the perspective of their own experience.
Yeah.
So then it's like, oh, well, like this doesn't make sense because that's not what happened to me. But it's like, yeah, but everybody's life isn't the same.
Exactly.
It's like, bro,
exactly.
like it's not the same thing. So yeah.
Yeah. Not only that, like I said before, it's also how you react to things. Like you said, he could have been in that environment and been like, oh, I definitely don't want anything to do with this. Or it could have been like, oh, I'm all in. This is all I know. This is comfortable for me. This is how I know how to live. And that's it. But yeah, I just, those type of black cops just really get under my skin because it's like, and actually it reminds me of like going back to the slave days, those people who were like the black people who would help
overseer. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's like, bruh, like
it's like I want to sleep in the big house. I'm tired of sleeping out here, so y'all figure it out.
Yeah.
It ain't got nothing to do with me.
I'll go and help you catch the slaves and everything else.
No solidarity.
None.
And no empathy, like I said, like yeah. So as they grow up, then we kind of see how all of these things play out, where Trey he has like he gets like a job at the mall where he's able to kind of afford nice clothes, which is obviously a direct result of his father teaching him responsibility.
It's that classic shirt on the cover, that black shirt with the with that like the beige and black shirt.
It kind of looked like the Gordon Gartrell shirt
from the Cosby Show.
Is this my shirt? Is this the shirt I paid $30 for? Is this the shirt they're supposed to think is a Gordon Gartrell?
It kind of looked like that.
And he got on the black slacks. Like, you can't tell him nothing.
He showed up. He showed up fresh. He had that little bop when he walked into the party. Like, okay.
And that's when Regina King sees him, and she's like, "Oh, who is that?"
Yeah.
And she's trying to mac on him, and then Brandy, his girlfriend, was like, "That's my man," and she's like, "Oh, like
that was the whole thing. Is like at the beginning, I'm like, "Is that actually your man, or like was this like a thing that you guys were kind of talking, kind of wasn't? Yo, what happened? You didn't call me back. Da da da." Like, I feel like they were kind of like in a situation.
They were talking,
but then it was kind of like, yeah, like don't even think about it. Like I've already claimed this.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the end, it definitely feels like they're like an actual couple.
Well, yeah, because remember like the whole thing, like him not having sex yet, and that scene in the car is actually pretty funny because he tells Ricky, like, "Nah, I never actually did it," and Ricky's like, "What?" And he's like, "No, I was afraid." And Ricky starts busting out laughing. He was like, "You were
What are you afraid about?
What are you afraid?" And he's like, "I don't want to have a kid." And he's like, "Oh."
He's like, "Oh yeah, I guess that's fair."
Because he is a kid, obviously. But yeah, so basically Brandy's like this good Catholic girl.
But also the fact of, I feel like that scene was also so interesting because it's like, I don't even think Ricky had that thought. Like when he first started having sex, I don't even think he thought about like, yo, what if I have a kid? It was just like,
yeah, let's do this.
Oh, like I never even thought about like what might happen afterwards. And then it's also like, oh, if she gets pregnant and has a kid, then she just has a kid.
Right.
Like that's what my mama did. So it's like, and my daddy ain't even here.
Right. Exactly. So it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, so basically like Brandy's this good, Catholic girl, and she tells Trey, like, "Nah, I'm trying to wait till I get married." Like, she's a good girl. You see her studying, like trying to get to school. Like he got himself a quote unquote good girl, like she's trying
special girl, real good girl.
She's trying to do what she got to do to get up out of there. And there's a scene that like I feel bad for her because she's trying to study. She's like reading her textbook, and there's just like gunshots going off outside, and you see her like covering her ears, and she keeps like flinching every time a gunshot happens because it's like, bro, I can't even do my homework because people are shooting around and there's helicopters flying over my building. Like, it's like, bruh. And again, like it goes back to the quote, the famous Doughboy quote you mentioned before, when he's talking about how he was watching the news and they were saying how it can affect people living in these violent situations in other countries, right? And even on the news, like you're seeing things happening in like, different Middle Eastern countries. Yeah. And it's like, bro, people live like Africa, this with gunshots outside. And it's like, yes, in this country, that's how people live. But he's like, they don't show that in the news. They're only showing how it affects people outside of America. They don't even want to see us.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing because even as I'm watching the film at the beginning, as them as kids, and like they're surrounded by gangs, they're surrounded by drugs, they're surrounded by murder, they're surrounded by guns.
Crooked cops.
Yeah, and it's like all of it is very much reminiscent of like a war zone.
Yeah.
Like you're thinking it's all of the same things that you would think that you'd see on the Gaza Strip. The only difference is that they have porches and front lawns.
Exactly.
Like it's like and palm trees outside and they have cars to drive, but it's like the quality of life is so poor, and even the way that like the way that Doughboy carries himself is like he seems to have a more of an understanding of the world than the rest of his friends.
Yeah.
And in a different situation would probably be a college student.
Absolutely.
But like that just wasn't the life that wasn't the cards that he was dealt. And he's kind of come to terms with the fact of like nothing good is gonna happen here, and I'm like we're all gonna die sooner or later. So like who really cares?
Who cares?
Like he just doesn't have any motivation to try for anything more because he doesn't have probably really any examples of like what his options could be.
Yeah, it's just so sad when I think about his character. Like, even when you think about the scene, I mean, I guess we can talk about the famous Ricky scene, right? We can go there. So basically, they were at the movie. They were at the movie theater.
They're at
Where were
kind of
they?
like a hangout spot on Crenshaw Boulevard. People kind of like drive with their cars. They got the music playing.
Have their windows
Everybody's
down.
just kind of like playing the block. It's kind of like parking lot pimping. And yeah, so then he basically like bumps into somebody.
Right, and this whole like argument ensues, and it's like blah blah blah, and then of course Doughboy's like
Posturing, flexing.
yeah, but Doughboy's like this is my brother,
Yeah.
and also I'm Doughboy, so he jumps out and basically shows his gun like what y'all gonna do. So the other crew basically just backs off because they're like, oh, he got a gun, like obviously like we don't want no smoke, and they leave out, and they're just chilling like, oh yeah, these people always want to flex, not gonna do anything, ha ha ha, and then next thing you know, they went back to their car and
Pop the trunk.
they had a burner on them.
Pop the trunk.
And
That was like a automatic.
he had an automatic,
Yo,
yeah.
That joint was, what was that? It was like an AR-15 or
like
something.
he had a serious
or
weapon.
a Uzi. I think he had an Uzi.
He just starts firing up in the air, and like, so I'm watching it with my husband, and he gets so upset because he's like, "Do people not know when you shoot bullets in the air, they have to come back
They
down?"
come down.
Like in movies, even in real life.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Even in real
This
life,
is not just in movies.
people start shooting up in the
do
air,
that.
and it's like you do know it's gonna come back down.
People do
somewhere.
that on the 4th of July every year.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's like people get shot by stray bullets. People don't think about that.
No, they don't.
They got to come back down. So he's shooting up in the air. Everybody's running, running for their life, and they leave out. And so we're thinking, okay, it's done. That happened. But then it's like, of course, now this crew is looking. They're like, oh, this guy tried to again. And it's so dumb because it's like nobody actually got hurt that night. So why am I now like, oh, I got to find these guys and I'm gonna mow them down, like because he bumped into me.
But what is it really about?
The blocks?
Nah, it's about his pride. It's about his reputation. It's about because like you also have to think about like the hood mentality too, right? Of like I don't have anything.
I ain't no punk.
And I ain't no punk. So it's like it's also like my reputation is basically that's my worth.
That's all you got.
That's
Yeah.
my currency.
Yeah.
And I have to maintain because then it's like, oh, like he got punked, they got in an argument, he ain't do nothing about it. Then what happens the next time I try to flex on somebody? Then it's like, oh, I remember what happened to you at Crenshaw Boulevard. And you ain't nothing. So it's like almost like it's not even just about the reputation. I feel like it's also just like a male ego.
Oh God.
And I think also like a sense of hopelessness because it's like I don't have anything
else
other than I think about this all the time when I see, and this might be a little judgmental, but like I'll see people sometimes like starting these like petty arguments in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
Like I was walking to get lunch the other day and some woman was literally screaming at the top of her lungs, cussing in front of her 2 little kids
Ugh.
at the woman who worked at the Subway talking about, I don't give a you work here, you gonna do this for me, da da da.
Oh, God.
And I'm thinking to myself, like, yo, what are all the things that are happening in her life that she has no control over?
Yeah.
And she's like,
Yeah.
you know what?
I'm gonna take it out on
I'm not
you.
letting this go.
Well, that's that transference, right?
Yeah, it's like I'm not letting this go because this is a situation where I feel like I can actually impose my will and like take control of it. So I feel like that has a lot to do with like the whole like block wars and like you kill my cousin, so then I'm gonna kill your cousin, and it's like
You know what
the
that reminds
cycle
me
just
of?
continues.
It also reminds me, if you think about like bullies in school, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times those bullies are the same ones when they go home, their pops is kicking their butt. They're told they're worthless, they're told this, that, and the other. And so it's like when I'm at home, like my pops is like kicking me and punch me in my face. So when I come to school, it's like, oh, you're smaller than me. I could kick you and punch you in your face. And so that's just a cycle that keeps repeating itself. And so I think that's also like, yeah, I got to make sure that I'm not a punk, and that people who see me will be like, oh yeah, we can't mess with him or his crew because, and also just the way that like once, no one's gonna ask a question to see who's right? Because like once I see that my boy jumped up, now I'm jumping up too.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't even matter what happened. You could be wrong, right?
don't
like
matter
it
who's
doesn't
right or
matter.
wrong.
It's like now it's just like, oh, everybody just automatically just like came to attention and was like, what? We all here.
Well, I also want to talk about like this dichotomy between Doughboy and Ricky because I feel like that's a really crucial part of the movie that I don't really feel like I had keyed in on before. But like I said, I'm watching the movie with my girlfriend, and she's like, you know, the mom keeps validating Ricky, but Doughboy's actually her smart son, and like Ricky's actually kind of an idiot.
Yes.
And I was like, yeah, he actually kind of is. Like, he, even like when he's meeting this recruiter from USC who's trying to talk to him about getting a scholarship to go play football there. And he's like, well, you know, like, football might not work out. Like, what do you think you want to major in?
He's like, huh?
And he's like, what? Like, he didn't even think about the fact that, like, oh, I'm going to have to study something when I get to college.
Right.
He's supposed to take the SAT. He's, like, way out of his depths. He doesn't know what he's doing.
He doesn't know what's going on.
But whenever you see Ice Cube, even though he's the street kid
Hood
who
one.
keeps getting in trouble and he's an ex-con and he sells drugs, he's always the one imparting knowledge on all his friends.
Yep.
He seems a little bit above the fray as well. Like, they kind of think on a very low level, and he's like, are y'all idiots? Like, that's not how things work.
Yeah.
And it's like, what if his mom had poured into him the way she poured into Ricky? Like, he actually would have achieved more.
Of course.
Whereas his brother, Ricky, is actually not intelligent, but because he can play a sport, it's like, oh, you're the one who, like, did the right things, and you're the one who, like, you know,
he just happens to be talented.
You make me so proud. But
and
it's
also,
like,
I like your pops. So there's that too. But it kind of reminds me of the scene when they're all like going to hang out and play, and he brings the football. And Doughboy's like, I tried to bring that stupid football. And he's like, what?
like,
What do you
from
mean?
the time they were
He's
kids,
like, why'd
he
you
was
bring
always
the football?
smarter
Like,
than him.
because he knew in that neighborhood someone's gonna try to jack your ball.
He
like,
understands.
He knows. And he's like, why? What do you mean? What? And he's like, bro, why'd you bring that? So it's like you're right. Like, even like not just street smarts, but he understands how things work. And he's like, all right, don't do this because this will happen. And Ricky's just like, going back to your point about having a kid, he was like, oh yeah, that. It's like, bro, you have a son. And you didn't think like maybe that's why Trey doesn't want to have sex. He doesn't want to have a kid right now. And he's like, oh. It's like, bro, where's your mind at?
I mean, even the way he died was like his
Bruh.
own naivete. Like, it was just like, you're an idiot, and it's cost you your life.
Made me so upset. You see the guys, you just got into a fight where you started shooting up the whole place. You decide to split up. And Trey's like, we probably shouldn't do that. And he's like, nah, it's fine. This guy's not going to do anything. But first of all, did you forget they were shooting it the last time you saw him?
You literally
That's
had to
fine.
duck between an alleyway just to get away from them.
it's fine.
Because they're circling the block at 2 p.m.
No,
Like, these guys don't care.
They don't care. But of course it's fine. Then he's walking down the street with a scratch off, bro. He's looking down, just scratching his lottery ticket. He's not like, Trey has his head on a swivel. He's looking around. He's trying to figure out where his car coming from. Like, and
He's not paying any attention at all.
man's looking down, just going for a walk, going for a stroll.
Not an intelligent
scratching up.
character.
I was like,
Ricky was not a smart guy.
so I'm watching this like, oh, this guy wants to get shot. Like, clearly he doesn't care. And then, of course, we know there's the Ricky.
Yeah.
And that's it for him. And it's like, okay, of course it's like, and again, I think when I watched it before, when you're watching the movie, you're thinking like, oh, this kid has so much promise. He's supposed to go to USC on athletic scholarship. Like,
Well, he was thinking about not even going.
I know. But again, like, I think my memory of it, yeah, he wanted to go to the military.
You want to go to army because he's
And
like,
Trey's like, yo, a black man, white man's army. And my pops told me, like, don't do it.
message. That was the other one.
My
Like, this
pops
is, but
told
this
me
is the
don't
thing.
do
It's
it.
like, yo, every gem that you're gonna get in this movie, it's coming from Furious,
Yes.
bro. Because I'm furious. But it's also like, I was watching that part and I'm like, well, he loves football. He's good at it, and he's gonna go to USC to play football. Like, he's gonna be lit. Like, why would he not want to do this? And the reason that I came up with, I think, is really just like, he's poor. He has this family, I guess, at home, his girlfriend and the baby, and I guess he's seeing it as like more of a long-term option versus like, I go to play football.
I might not make it to
I
the
might not
NFL.
make it, or I might not even get into college because he's worried that he's not going to be able to get a 700 on the SAT.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He probably
He's
won't.
like, you have to get like a 2.3 GP. He's like, you have a 2.3 GPA, which is
Oh
pretty
my
bad in
God.
high school.
You have to try to get that low.
Like his GPA is awful. So it's like, you're not really good academically. You have to get at least a 700. Mind you, this is out of 1,600. So you got to get a 350 on math, and you got to get a 350 on reading.
I don't know if he's getting it.
And he's like, yeah, like, I don't know about this. So I feel like it was really just the SAT.
Maybe.
And that was like making him nervous. And then he's like, also like, if I go to college, like, this is a frontier that I don't know how to navigate.
Yeah.
And I think the whole idea of like elevating his
Oh,
circumstance
it's terrifying.
made him so nervous that he was just like, yo, I don't think I'm going to go.
No, I understand that completely. But I think watching it again and understanding that this time around, I feel like when I first watched it, it was just always like, oh my God, Ricky had so much promise, and like he wasn't even really involved like in the game, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And now he's dead, and it's like, oh, it's so sad. But it's like when you think about like who's actually the more intelligent brother, who actually
Oh, yeah.
it's like clearly we don't want Ricky to die. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying like when the first time I watched it, it was like, oh, he was like the promising of the two, like he was the most promising brother. But I was like, Doughboy actually like he was more lit. But I didn't see it the first time I watched it at all.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, Doughboy actually.
And
like,
that's actually like the whole point, right? Like that's the
Yeah.
whole point. Is like that's his mother didn't see it either,
well,
and he's like, "Yo, I don't got no brother no more, and I don't even really got a mother because she don't even love me."
I mean, she
So-
blames him.
Yeah,
What did you do?
Of
And it's
course.
like it wasn't even his fight, really.
but
But of course,
you're the
gonna
one.
blame-
You're the knucklehead that's always getting in trouble. So you must have been the one that's responsible for getting my favorite son killed. And I also feel like I said, Ricky died because he was an idiot.
Yes.
Not only because of the fact that you're not watching where you're going when someone's literally circling the block to try to kill you,
God.
but like you knew that this man that you bumped into has a reputation. Because when they're
Yes.
in the car, I think it was Regina King's character is like, yo, he's always trying to pick fights with somebody so that he can try to prove that he's tough, so that he can try to like whatever. So it's like you kind of already know what it is. And instead of being like, let me reassess and think about a different way to handle this, you buck up and you make it
Right.
a scene
Why?
where it's like, bro, and now you have your brother have to come and save you. So it's like the whole situation really probably could
Could've
have
been
been avoided
avoided,
if
yeah.
he was just a little bit smarter, but he just wasn't smart.
No, unfortunately, he was just a good-looking guy with a nice smile.
So as we get ready to wrap this up, before we give our rewinds out, I wanna talk about like any potential themes that you found from this movie.
Yikes! We didn't even go over any quotes or anything. We just
Because we've been talking
I
for a
know,
while,
I
so
know.
yeah.
Okay. Yikes. Okay, themes. Oh man, I have so many things to talk about. Okay. So, number of themes in this movie. So you have the themes. You have, I think, the nature versus nurture is a big one because obviously, I think restraint is a big one because after Ricky dies, we have Trey's character. He automatically is like, "Oh, that's it. Like this guy has to go down." And again, it's like Trey, like you're not in this life, but he goes, gets his pop's gun out, and he's like ready to go, balls to the wall, and he gets in the car with Doughboy, getting ready to go shoot the guy, and his pops basically talks to him, and he's like, essentially like, "What are you doing? Like, if you want to be so big and bad, you want to shoot a gun, shoot me. Like, yeah, let's do it." And his pops really does save him from having to be responsible for taking someone's life because in that moment he was so reactionary, which I mean we get. It's like, yes, your best friend.
Yeah.
So you want to do something about it. But in that moment, although he did go,
And he had a whole breakdown before that even happened.
because of the cop.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that crooked cop. So it's like all this stuff is going on in his brain. It's like, I'm in this environment. The cops are basically out here doing all types of crazy police brutality stuff. My best friend just got murdered over nothing, and I need to release this anger somehow. But Furious is able to talk him down and show him how to use restraint in that moment, which was super important to save like just his psyche, because I don't think his character would have been able to handle being responsible for killing somebody. Like Trey's character, I don't think is made for that. I think it would have broke him mentally to think that he like went out and like killed 2 or 3 people or even one person. Like that's just not. That's just,
And to be clear, like I think that's the normal human response. Like anybody who takes another human's life is gonna be haunted by it.
but Doughboy is kind of just like, and then even like the way Doughboy's
I
character,
think he was bothered by it
he
too.
was bothered by
Yeah.
it. Because he asked him, like, how was it, whatever, and he told him, and it was kind of like, I'm glad you got out the car. Like, he even said, like, I'm glad you weren't there for that. Because he didn't want him to have to deal with what he's dealing with.
Yeah.
And then when you think about going to the end of the movie where we find out that basically, like, 2 weeks after Ricky's funeral, Doughboy ends up getting murdered. And it's just like this cycle that just keeps happening,
And he called it.
He said
Like,
it.
yeah, somebody probably gonna try to smoke me next.
And that's just.
But we all gotta go sometimes, so it's whatever.
Yeah, it just.
Like it was like the resignation of just like, I might die. I'm probably not gonna grow to be old, but like it actually doesn't matter because I don't have anything to live for anyway.
It just sounds. It's just also hopeless.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Like at the end of it, like you just feel like. What was the point of all of it? You know.
But Trey gets to go to Morehouse, so he made it out.
He did, but his 2 best friends are gone, and I feel like going back to Snowfall, it kind of reminds me. If you guys have not seen Snowfall, I highly recommend it. The end of that show to this day still like breaks my heart because it's like just to see where the main character was and how he ends up, like it's heartbreaking. Like I feel like him, dying would have been.
But it's
But
it's
it's just,
yeah.
ugh.
I mean, without giving the show away, it's also like, you reap what you sow, and all those things. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I said, I think watching this movie over for whatever number of times I've now watched it, I think what stood out to me more this time was the children and how they were influenced. And so like I think the big themes that stood out for me was like the truth that you pour into your kids can really manifest what they become or like what their lives turn out to be, right? Like Doughboy's mom constantly reinforced what he would become, and so he did.
Right.
Trey's parents constantly told him what they expected from him, and so he met those expectations.
Yeah.
And so I just think about like, the enormous challenge and responsibility that parents have to make sure that like
you're
not
raising good humans.
Raising your kid and telling him you're an idiot and you're not gonna. But just like the way that you can tell them, because even when his father is giving him this advice about how he needs to handle Ricky's death, and at first he's like, "Nah, I'm tight. I'm gonna react," and he escapes out his bedroom window to go do what he's gonna do. But his dad's voice was still in the back of his mind as he's riding around in that car, and that's probably what makes him get out. And it's like, if his dad wasn't constantly, of course, as a parent, you're gonna still be disappointed by decisions that your child makes, but you hope that eventually, at some point, some of what you said is gonna click. And I feel like that was that moment where he's like, "Yo, like this is actually not what I'm supposed to be doing," and understanding like all of those lessons that his father was giving him. And I think the other piece is like the concept of generational trauma and how it becomes a cycle. So not only for like Doughboy and Ricky, like what happened to her life made her carry out her parenthood the way that she did? Or like what happens to those 2 babies of that crackhead?
And also what happens to Ricky's son?
What happens to Ricky's son? Ricky's son is never going to know his father.
Or his uncle.
Right, exactly. And so like just like that concept, and I just read this novel Homegoing, which like phenomenal, definitely 100% read it. But I feel like that was a big theme in that book as well, of just like how does something that even happened 200 years ago, like how does that play itself out? So yeah, like whew, this movie was heavy. There weren't many laughs in this episode, but this movie doesn't lend itself to as many jokes, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean there were a couple of quotes, but we don't have time to go over them.
We can shoot through a few real quick if you got some that are burning.
So so I thought it was really funny when the kids are first discovering the bullet holes in the blood. And one of the little girls is like, "Is that blood? What happened?" And the kid's like, "What do you think? Somebody got smoked. There's a hole in the wall, stupid." And then she's like, "At least I can tell my timetables."
Yeah, I mean, hey, listen.
And that just made me laugh because it was like, at the end of the day, like, bro, I'm still smart, so sit down. And then also every time like one of the dudes from Doughboy had like a drink, like a 50. He was like a 50, a 40, 50, a 40, and he's passing it around, and he's like, peer pressure. He's like, peer pressure, peer pressure. And he's passing it around. He's like, peer pressure, peer pressure, peer pressure. And he's making them drink.
Yeah.
So that was funny. Cause I feel like talk about peer pressure, and it's like something you want to avoid doing, but it's like he knew it was peer pressure, and he still was kind of telling them like,
it's like that Kendrick song,
it's
the,
like,
art
I know.
The Art of Peer Pressure.
I know, but just peer pressure. Just take this. Just drink this real fast.
I like the part where after he gets out of jail and they're talking about like religion or something, and he's talking about, oh yeah, I was in jail. This book I read, da da da. And his boy's like, what you talking about? You ain't read no book. He said, yo, I ain't a criminal. I can read. Bitch. I ain't no criminal.
And that's the thing too. Like he reads. Like he
does.
He's intelligent. He wants to make sure that he's understanding things and learning things. So it's like his character. I feel like he got. When I was younger, I didn't really appreciate him, and now I'm like,
Doughboy's
actually
the man.
lit. Yeah, I didn't realize it before. But one thing I noticed that was kind of interesting is, did you see what Ricky was eating the whole like movie?
Just Hostess cakes and drinking milk out of the carton.
So it was this thing
called
they're called Chocodiles.
Chocodiles, yeah.
And it's basically like a chocolate covered Twinkie.
Oh.
It's from Hostess.
Huh.
I was like, what is this?
I don't think that exists
I was
anymore.
like, what? No, I don't believe so. But I saw that and I was like, oh, like that's kind of lit. I also noticed like one of the guys kept sucking on a pacifier.
Mm-hmm.
That was just like his look. So this is not really funny. It's actually kind of sad. But that character, he played Dookie. He actually was shot and killed during an argument at a drag race in '94. So it's like
the actor.
The actor.
Oh wow.
I was like, good God.
Well, the pacifier reminded me of like this concept of like these are boys that never really grew up.
Yeah.
And then, obviously John Singleton also goes on to create Baby Boy, which is
Baby Boy, that movie.
You got to think maybe from an imagery perspective, maybe he already had that idea in the back of his mind while having this character sucking on a pacifier. And then he kind of fleshed it out with the Baby Boy movie.
Okay, ready to give our ratings?
I mean, you already know what I'm going with this. This is a 5 rewinds, easy. This is the easiest 5 I've ever given on this podcast. This is like a super classic for me. It's a movie that like no matter how many times I see it, I feel like I get something different out of it. It's so well shot. It's so well acted. The messages are clear, but it doesn't feel preachy. And it just feels also very authentic. Like it feels like it doesn't feel flowery. It doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel like trauma porn.
That's a big one because sometimes they go a little bit too far.
But it's just like, this is what's happening in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and I want to talk about it. And he gets every point across so well. And even some of the points that I don't think I recognized before, it's like every time I watch it, I'm getting something new out of it. So definitely 5 rewinds for me. This is a movie that I will probably be watching over and over again for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I have to agree with you. And I think the reason why I'm giving it 5 out of 5 is just I think the casting was really perfection.
Yeah.
Like when you're watching like Ice Cube, you're like, oh, he's not acting. Like he's Doughboy.
He's
you know
killing.
What I mean? Like he's
killing.
Doughboy. Like when you're watching Cuba, you're like, he is Trey. Funny thing about that is apparently they were considering casting Will Smith as Trey instead of Cuba.
I can see that. Especially Will Smith in 1991.
Playing. That's what I was thinking. Like that early Will character.
Oh yeah, I think
where
he
it's
could have
like,
pulled that off.
I think they could, but they also were considering doing Eddie Murphy as Furious Styles, and
I don't like that.
I don't
as
like
much.
it at all. Yeah,
I don't like that.
I think I think Lawrence Fishburne. I think that was perfect. He just came off as like a guy who was learned. He knew what it was. He was intelligent, but then he also lived in the hood. So he had his own burner. He knew how to shoot it, as we saw earlier.
Well, yeah, he needed it.
He needed it.
Yeah.
And like he knew how to handle his business. He knew how to raise a man, and it's like I just loved him as a dad. Like I just loved him. I loved his character all together. He was just a great guy. But overall, I really did enjoy it. I really got a different perspective, like I said, because I felt more like Doughboy was better than Ricky, in my opinion. And just seeing how those kids had to be raised up and what they were brought around, they kind of like to live through every day, and that was their quote unquote normal. It was heartbreaking, but also realistic, you know? So it's like, I definitely would say I would watch it again. And if you had youngsters, maybe they're not too young, maybe teenagers, it would be a good film to watch in your teen and discuss.
Yeah, you talk about Lawrence Fishburne, who I think is called Larry Fishburne in the credits, but how he's just like such a good guy, and the dichotomy. This is ironic, I guess, for me seeing him and Angela Bassett playing the parents. Because
right.
you know they're
Eat the cake.
They're not Ike and Tina Turner,
Eat the cake.
Which I think is probably like not so far. Like that's probably like 93,
Yeah,
94.
probably a few years
So like,
later.
yeah, it's only a few years later, and they end up being in another movie together, playing a couple.
Iconic.
Another iconic movie, yeah, for sure. Great suggestion.
Yes, thank you.
Shout out to the submissions. Keep them coming in. We want to continue to try to review the movies that you guys want to see us review. So if you have more suggestions, again, you can reach out to our email, which is in the description for the podcast. We also have a Twitter and Instagram page at RR90spod.
Facebook now's up too.
And we had a Facebook page as well.
We watch page on Facebook.
And of course, we obviously, I feel like one of those people, but now I'm going to be one of those people who says, make sure you subscribe, make sure you leave us a rating, make sure you leave us some comments. But the ratings do really help because that will help to boost the podcast for other people who haven't yet gotten a chance to check us out. Any closing words?
Do the right thing.
The movie, or is that just like a general message?
Just a general message.
Just for the audience, just do the right thing.
Do the right thing.
All right. All right. On that note, do the right thing, folks.